Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see the room so full. It's almost as if a very important legislative proposal just came out or something. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels. I'm going to be guiding us through this evening's conversation, which, of course, I'm sure as all of you in the room know, is very, very timely because we'll be talking about the EU pharmaceutical law revision, which was just put forward by the European Commission last week, fulfilling a promise they made in the 2020 pharmaceutical strategy. The main goals are to improve affordability, timely access, and availability of medicines in Europe, which remains a challenge for many European governments. So we're going to be tackling some of the key questions here today, such as how to increase manufacturing resilience to secure the supply of off-patent medicines and active pharmaceutical ingredients, and how to improve equitable and patient access to off-patent medicines via the pharmaceutical passage. So, to get us started in tonight's discussion, I would like to introduce our host for the evening, center-right Greek MEP Stelios Kimpouropoulos, who will be delivering some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dave, distinguished panelists, dear guests. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for your presence, and especially to Medicines for Europe, EU40, and Mr. Theodore Trifold for the collaboration of the event. Unfortunately, due to a health issue and my hospitalization the last 2 weeks, I could not be with you in person. I'm sure that this will not be an obstacle to have a fruitful conversation. It is an honor to have you all here today at this critical moment for Europe. We are facing a crossroads in the European legislation, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to undertake the first major review of the pharmaceutical legislation since 2004, which will adapt the legislation to the current socio-economic challenges. It's therefore my pleasure to welcome you to the event titled European Pharmaceutical Strategy at the Crossroads, Dependence versus Market Consolidation, co-organized with the Medicines for Europe. As a disease patient, a doctor, and a politician, this revision is of utmost importance to me. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in view of the state of health in the EU, we need to have a future-proof and a resilient health system for our European citizens. The EU is also becoming increasingly dependent on non-EU countries for importing medicines and their active ingredients. We really need to tackle the shortage of medicine and raw materials and strengthen EU's independence. In the European Parliament, we will strike for the revision to find the right balance between supporting competitiveness and innovation, accelerating the access to medicines all across the EU. Our existing legislation has served us well, but as new scientific and technological advances emerge, we need to adapt our laws to ensure the safety and efficacy of medicines for patients. We need a modern and streamlined regulatory framework that fosters innovation, promotes patient safety, and supports the competitiveness of the European pharmaceutical industry. The reform simplifies and replaces the previous pharmaceutical legislation with 2 legislative proposals, a new directive and a new regulation, which constitute the EU regulatory framework for all medicines, including those for orphan drugs and pediatrics. It also includes a Council recommendation on antimicrobial resistance, which set concrete objectives and activities to strengthen member states' action against antimicrobial resistance. The revision of the EU pharma legislation is a crucial step towards achieving these goals. It will bring new rules for clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, and market authorization procedures for medicines. It will also enhance transparency and accessibility of information on medicines, promote sustainable pharmaceutical manufacturing, and strengthen the fight against fabricated medicines. Certainly, finding the right balance between fast and affordable access to medicine and promoting innovation and competitiveness in the pharmaceutical industry is a critical challenge we face. In my opinion, this balance can only be achieved through smart and effective regulation that encourages innovation while also ensuring that patients have access to safe and effective medicines at an affordable cost. One way to achieve this balance is by streamlining and simplifying the regulatory process for new medicines without compromising patient safety or efficacy. This could be extremely valuable for patients, healthcare professionals, but the industry as well. As a rare disease person myself, I know from first hand the importance of timely access to effective treatments. For many of us, access to appropriate medicines can be a matter of life or death. This makes it all the more important for us to have a regulatory framework that incentivizes and supports the development of treatments for rare diseases, giving access to medicines in all member states, developing new medicines, and conducting comparative clinical trials. We need regulatory framework that prioritizes patient access to safe and effective treatments regardless of the rarity of the disease. We should build on the current high standards of quality, safety, and efficacy for the production and authorization of medicines in the EU, and take this opportunity to reform and find new tools in addressing unmet needs. Thank you once again for your presence.
Thank you very much, MEP Kimpouropoulos. Now we're going to turn to our next opening remarks, which will be from Theodore Tryphon, who is Executive Member of Medicines for Europe and the President of the Pan-Hellenic Union of the Pharmaceutical Industry.
Thank you, Dave. Honorable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. As Executive Member of Medicines for Europe and President of the Greek Industry Association, PEF, representing generic, biosimilars and value-added medicine manufacturers, I am honored to be here today to speak to you about the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead for a more competitive and sustainable European off-patent industry that contributes to the sustainability of EU's healthcare systems. I would like to thank Mr. Kimbouropoulos for hosting such a timely and important discussion. We at Medicines for Europe and our member companies are responsible for supplying the largest share of medicines across Europe, covering 80% of therapy areas and supplying close to 70% of all dispensed medicines in the EU. Despite this, we only account for 29% of the pharmaceutical expenditure. In so doing, generic, biosimilar, and value-added industries safeguard the sustainability of Europe's healthcare system for future generations. Our priority now is to ensure that affordable medicines reach patients in need as soon as possible. However, this is not always the case, and we've seen it during the recent crisis. Equitable and timely access to medicines and the sustainability of healthcare systems remain a challenge for many European countries. At the same time, cost containment and industrial consolidation runs counter to the EU's new pharmaceutical strategy and its commitment to increase manufacturing resilience and European open strategic autonomy. Now we are definitely at a crossroad and a very important decision-making moment in Europe's pharmaceutical policy framework. Europe will either move forward, standing firm on its robust manufacturing footprint, encouraging competition and promoting research and technologies that actually reach patients, or Europe risks misbalancing market sustainability by following practices that inevitably will result in furthering our dependency on third country imports. It is evident that we need an industrial strategy directed at strengthening the European off-patent sector and improving open strategic autonomy in health. Therefore, we at Medicines for Europe have called for a new Medicine Security Act. This will introduce measures that encourage more generic medicine supply and supply chain resilience. This will allow the EU to remain a global pharmaceutical manufacturing leader for essential medicines and API production in the next years. Lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine have highlighted the fragility of the European API and medicine supply chains. It is absolutely clear, now more than ever, that Europe needs to depend more on its own resources and build on its already existing manufacturing base. Medicines for Europe member companies' economic footprint is already very significant. With over 400 manufacturing sites throughout Europe, 45 of which I'm proud to say are located in Greece. Moreover, in response to the global crisis, Medicines for Europe member companies have recognized Europe's need for resilience and committed in these very difficult times to expanding and investing in 14 new API plants and 17 finished dosage form manufacturing sites, all within Europe. This will have a huge impact both on increased access to medicines and the European economy. That is why I would like to stress that it is imperative now more than ever that the EU encourages its manufacturing leadership position. As president of PEF, the Greek Association, I'm also proud to represent 45 manufacturing companies. These are prime examples of how European pharmaceutical companies are investing and encouraging manufacturing and increasing R&D in Europe. In Greece, our sector currently employs over 14,000 direct employees, almost 15% of which are women. We have committed to create additional 5,000 new jobs in the next years through our industry's new investment plans. However, I would like to point out that the industry-driven investments cannot come into effect without the implementation of suitable supply-side policies. This will have to address the negative effects of the pandemic and, more recently, the effects of inflation that have exacerbated costs for the generic medicine market, which remains highly price-sensitive, as everybody knows. Rising costs due to inflation, management of high energy prices, and guaranteed security of production are significant challenges, but not the only ones. A very real challenge also that lies ahead will affect labor markets, and this is also a difficulty of finding and maintaining skilled workforces. Europe has to address security of supply issues with policy such as rewarding supply reliability in procurement, and possibly take into consideration the geographical location of manufacturing. In Greece, for example, the procurement practice of establishing a multi-winner tendering system for the hospital sector has been established since 2018. This system has enabled us to go through the crisis without shortages, because with this system, we have a steady supply of the Greek hospital pharmaceutical market, avoiding risks of over-reliance on single suppliers and shortages. In addition to sustainable procurement and pricing policies, access to European funds will be key to strengthening the off-patent sector resilience and competitiveness and ensure it is fit for the green and digital transition. This is very, very important, as we have seen that on the other side of the Atlantic, the US government has very fast given many significant incentives for industries for this transition for the next years. So we have to act fast also in Europe. Finally, I would like to highlight that with the publication of the new pharmaceutical legislation, we have the opportunity to establish forward-looking pharmaceutical policies that focus on the value brought to patients and health systems. Specifically, we hope to achieve a policy mix that ensures timely access to generic, biosimilar, and value-added medicine for all patients when exclusivity expires, guaranteeing day one launch. This is very important. Ensures that off-patent medicines remain available at all times, addressing the root causes of medicine shortages that we have been facing the last months. Supports a resilient manufacturing and industrial policy in Europe by integrating much-needed competitiveness policies that create and maintain manufacturing jobs in Europe. If we find the right policy mix, we will then be able to provide millions of patients with access to their treatments by coordinating EU action on essential medicines and access to care, translating political statements into real policy reform. As we look ahead to the future, we at Medicines for Europe look forward to working with the European Parliament and Member States to make equitable and timely access, availability and security of supply for all a reality in Europe. Thank you indeed.
Thanks very much. And now we'll have opening remarks from our third host, EU40. We'll hear from Ellery Duval, Managing Director of EU40, which is the platform of young pro-European members of the European and national parliaments.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see this discussion coming together, and it's a pleasure to have everyone present in this room finally. So I'm Ellery Duval, Managing Director of EU40. EU40 is the network of young members of the European Parliament. We regroup members of the European Parliament who are pro-European and under 40 years old. And it's our pleasure to be supporting MEP Stelios Kimpouropoulos today in the organization of this event and in its promotion. I would like to simply say a few short words to thank Mr. Kimpouropoulos and thank his team for the organization of this event. Now, EU40's role is to help MEPs achieve their roles, achieve their goals, and shed light on their work. So I won't be taking too much time away from the discussion. I'll be giving the floor back to you, but thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Ellery. Now, we're going to start the first panel where we're going to be talking about strategic autonomy in healthcare. Strategic autonomy being a big, high-level discussion right now, not specific to healthcare, but in all areas of EU policy, basically trying to make the EU self-sufficient, not reliant on outside powers. And we're going to be talking in this panel about how that relates specifically to healthcare and to medicines, and how Europe can strengthen investments into essential medicines and API production in Europe. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic tested European healthcare systems and healthcare systems worldwide, while also shining a light on a long-standing issue, which is supply chain bottlenecks. The November 2020 Pharmaceutical Strategy for Europe came out during the height of the pandemic, and so those issues were very much on mind for the Commission. And that was then followed up with the updated industrial policy of May 2021, which called for European open strategic autonomy that enables the EU to be stronger, both economically and geopolitically. As part of that, a structured dialogue on the security of medicine supply was set up in 2021, and its outcomes were published in October of 2022. So, how does this all relate to medicines? What lessons were learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly when it came to vaccines, in terms of Europe's reliance on external providers, on Europe's supply chains, and on European cooperation, whether Europe can achieve more when it's united in the area of healthcare than when it's divided. So let me introduce you to our panelists that we have to be discussing this. We have Gloria Kikier, advisor in the cabinet of Frank van den Broeke, who is Belgium's Vice Minister for Social Affairs and Public Health. We have Philippe Dreschel, Vice President for EU Portfolio at the Israeli multinational pharma company Teva. And unfortunately, Kristen Schreiber from the European Commission is unable to join us tonight. She had a last-minute emergency. So we're going to proceed with just the two panelists for our panel. So Gloria, let me turn to you first. The Belgian government is very attentive to the security of medicine supply. This has actually been identified as a key priority for the Belgian government. Could you present to us the main points of this non-paper that Belgium has just come out with in the Council, which has been supported by several member states? Tell us a little bit about what's in that non-paper.
Thank you, Dave. And also, thank you, Mr. Kimpouropoulos. It really is an exciting moment for European health policy, so I'm glad about this, and I'm glad you invited me. Indeed, Europe just faced a very harsh winter for its medicine supply, and so shortages is one of the main priorities for Belgium, also when now we are going towards our presidency in 2024. We did build a coalition with 19 member states around the non-paper. The idea is that shortages are getting worse every year, so there is really no time to waste. We set out 3 goals in our non-paper. First of all, we want to organize a solidarity between member states to counter acute shortages. We have seen that all member states face shortages, but shortages are not the same in all member states. For instance, during this winter, we have seen that some countries faced serious antibiotics shortages, others faced thrombolytics shortages, there were others that faced epileptics shortages, so it's not the same everywhere, and we can help each other out. We therefore want to install some kind of mechanism where countries can notify the others that they need urgent help. This is really in case of serious shortages, where you will fall without stock within the next 2 weeks or whatever, and you need other countries to step up. Unfortunately, we have seen these kinds of situations in the past. Secondly, we need to get an accurate picture on the supply chains and production locations of critical medicines. Today, we notice that our medicines agencies lose valuable time because we don't have transparency on the production bottlenecks and we don't immediately know where the alternative suppliers are. We need this kind of information. It really is one of the big lessons of the pandemic. We want a list of critical medicines for which we can immediately start doing a mapping exercise to begin with those products where there have been repeated shortages. Thirdly, and as the last one, Dave said I only have 3 minutes, so I'm rushing through. We want to reduce the market monopolies and high-risk foreign dependencies. We are aware that the off-patent medicine sector is extremely consolidated, as you have mentioned. 40% of global trade of active ingredients comes from China, and for over 50%, we have less than 5 certified manufacturers for Europe. This means that it would only take a pandemic, a war, a natural disaster, or even a manufacturing glitch, or maybe a boat stuck in the Suez Canal to endanger the global supply of medicines. And we do not wish to stand idly and watch. So that's why 19 countries call for a Critical Medicines Act to enhance the EU manufacturing base. This is similar to what the EU is already doing for microchips and for critical raw materials. Thank you.
Those scenarios you listed might have seemed far-fetched 5 years ago, but they've all happened in the past 5 years. Philippe, let's turn to you next. Now, your company manufactures both medicine and API in Europe, which makes this legislation very, very important for you. What set of holistic policies would you like to see in the EU in order to preserve the competitiveness of off-patent medicines in the EU in a way that works the best for you as a business?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me here. And maybe I'd like to start a bit with the European footprint that my company has, but also the industry. I think Theodoris also highlighted a few points. So we are indeed a European manufacturer. We are manufacturing affordable, high-quality medicines in Europe. And just to give you some figures here, we do have 15 manufacturing sites in 15 member states. We had in 2021, we generated or contributed to 100,000 jobs. Labor income was 5 billion, so that's big figures, and indirect revenue was 26 billion. But most importantly, of course, savings that were generated were around 9 billion for the healthcare system. So that's a kind of a win-win, right? It's the economy, it's the healthcare systems that are becoming sustainable. So that's about a company, and actually, still is happening now in Europe. As we speak, we are just finalizing the manufacturing of a biologic manufacturing site in Germany. We invested 1 billion euros in that site, and that's just my company. Other companies in the industry in Europe are doing exactly the same. I see a few colleagues here that are high investments. So we are a European industry in general. It's a bit okay, yeah. It's better? Yeah. So we are a European industry, and we have an economic footprint which is very important. But at the same time, I think what we need to acknowledge is that there is a problem in the system, because the system is still targeting to price-only criteria, for example. Yeah. So it's the race to the bottom. I like to call it the race to the bottom on the pricing, and it didn't change. Yeah. It hasn't halted so far, and I can give you some examples here. In Germany, the daily treatment cost has dropped from 17 euro cents per one unit, one tablet, to 6 cents within 10 years. In the Netherlands, the daily treatment is 6 cents per tablet. So it's super low values. I always like to compare it with a pack of chewing gum, which is much more expensive in the end. So that's one of the elements. And what we also see at the same time are regulatory requirements that are becoming increasingly burdens, if you want so. And we see a lot of initiatives that are highly welcome. We talk about banning titanium dioxide. We talk about banning PFAS, so the eternal chemicals. We're talking about urban wastewater directives. All great initiatives. I think they're all great for the environment. But we need to be aware that they are putting a big burden on a fragile industry, and we need to do all those things in a very aligned and smooth way. So this is kind of the imbalance that we are seeing in our industry. And maybe to answer your question now, what needs to be done, right? This is more the catalogue of issues we're seeing. What needs to be done? First of all, Gloria, I think fully supportive of what you said in terms of a Critical Medicines Act. I think you're highlighting some of the issues. It's not a simple problem. It's a complex problem. It's about talking to each other. It's about finding good ways of collaborating. But also, I think 3 elements that we should probably work on in a very collaborative way is, first of all, to secure European investments. I think the public funding is key. We heard it. And I just got a little paper here, which you might maybe not see in a comprehensive way, but it's just illustrating the number of companies that do have currently. So I hope you can see something. It's a lot of little points. You can see actually different member states here, and actually all those dots are companies that have applied for fundings when the whole IPCI started, and that was early 2022. Of course, that was early 2022, and you know how many of those projects have been finalized? None. So that's where we are, right? It's not. Of course, it's just a reality that things need to go fast, and we cannot just wait for the trend to continue. So that's one thing. Preventing also shortages by supporting the supply chain is super important, and here again, it's all about creating an economical viable environment, moving away from this price-only criteria to multi criteria, multi-winners, because it's always a critical situation if one company, one player gets a full market with a thin margin. That's really a problem. But secondly, also working on the regulatory flexibilities, on the regulatory regimes. by using the great systems that we have now in terms of telematics, in terms of digital, and that is really something we should also be supportive of. Finally, when shortages happen, or when we see that they're just in front of the door, we should also work on the transparency, dialogue, and again, the flexibility. And you know what? The great thing is we have a fantastic system, potentially, which is called EMVS. It's a European medicines verification system for the track and trace system we have in place. And that system is already, would help us actually to understand what is happening in our European supply chain. And to Gloria's point, then you might just start, moving products across Europe. But to do that, you also need to have flexibility in the way the products are being packed. But typically also, one element the industry is advocating for, it's the electronic leaflet. Because, just think about it. If you can move a pack and you don't need to repack from France to Germany, from Germany to Greece, the patient has access to all the relevant information with an electronic leaflet. So that's very important. And maybe the last point to mention here is maybe a bit technical, but we do have, for all the marketing authorizations, we have what we call repeat use procedures, so you can actually add new markets or new countries into that procedure. That is super complicated nowadays. And that would be certainly something we should be looking into. So that's more the recommendations, and I also want to maybe issue, or it's issuing some concern that putting additional hurdles on things like mandatory stockpiling, penalties, and things like that might actually create even more disincentives to stay on the market. So we need to be attentive that those fragile products become even more fragile because there are even more requirements put on the table. So,
thanks a lot, Philippe. Gloria, I wanted to come back to this idea of a Critical Medicines Act that you mentioned. Can you expand on a little bit about what the base of the idea is of that? What's the purpose of that? How do you envision that such an act would be shaped by the European Commission? And which other member states are supportive in your quest to get this off the ground?
19 member states are supportive. So that's a lot. No, the inspiration from the Act clearly comes from the CHIPS Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act, and it's to increase our share in global manufacturing. That's the basic idea, right? I think it's important to say, and this leads sometimes to some confusion, it is not one act, it's a toolbox of different instruments. So I think it's important. Financing, indeed, would be an important part where we are looking at the reform of the health IPCEIs, but I also think that future discussions on a sovereignty fund should take into account the proposal that we have now put on the table. Fast-track permitting procedures could be one of them, of course. Also public procurement. Maybe we should, we think we should enhance security of supply criteria, and indeed multi-winner tenders could also be a part of that. I think what I really appreciate about what Europe has done so far, specifically with regards to the Critical Raw Materials Act, is that we are clear about what kind of production we want in Europe. And this is very different from how we have done things so far. For instance, with the critical raw materials, we are clear, we have 6 minerals and we want to mine them and processing them. And we would like to strive to something similar for the Critical Medicines Act, where we are clear what kind of medicines we need, what kind of production base we need here in Europe.
Thanks a lot. Philippe, let me come back to you on some of these digital issues. You mentioned the EMVS and the digital leaflet. Obviously, investing in those types of systems takes money. What type of EU funding would be helpful for companies in making those investments in terms of digital infrastructure. And would that digital infrastructure help in the security of supply issue? Is that the case that can be made for why EU money should be spent on this? How can those digital tools help security of supply?
Thanks, Dave. So I would say that there are two levels here. So first of all, when I mentioned the EMVS system, it's something that we do already in place, and it's probably not highly expensive just to adapt it, right? So I would say those are things where there should be more of a willingness to do so, because we all know when it's about systems, when it's about data, there are some concerns here and there. So that's more about the willingness, and then we can execute on them. When it comes to the electronic leaflet, of course, it's a bit more complex. If you think about the implementation in the wider industry, and how to make sure that the access is granted to everybody, including those who might not have an easy access with a smartphone, for example. But also this can be probably solved if there is a willingness behind it. I think that the second piece is probably more related to manufacturing, where we also, as an industry, are calling for support and on the two levels, right? So one is more on the greening of the manufacturing, and the other one is getting manufacturing more digital, which will make it more efficient, which will make it also more competitive, and that is where probably the biggest part of the investment should lie. And again, IPCI is already covering to some extent those elements if being executed properly.
I have one more question for you guys before I'll open it up to the floor for questions from you guys to the panelists. Gloria, you mentioned that the Critical Medicines Act is kind of meant to mirror or kind of jump on the Critical Raw Materials Act idea that there are certain things that are critical and Europe should be proactive about securing their supply. That should also apply to medicines, in addition to minerals. I wonder, though, in terms of the root causes for the security of supply issues, the Commission has identified some economic root causes for why those issues are happening. What could be some of the short-term actions that could be taken that can address in a more immediate way why those bottlenecks are happening? Because of course, when you're looking at the critical medicines toolbox, that is thinking ahead to the future, but what can we do in the short and medium term?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a few things that maybe we could start doing now. Like the supply chain mapping, we could start doing now. Of course, you are referring to the price of medicines, it's a difficult question. Not in the sense that we do not agree that sometimes some medicines are too lowly priced. I think we agree for pediatric antibiotics, for instance, there has been a problem. But the real problem is that the national systems for pricing are so different. And so if you would want to go at it in a European way, then how would you coordinate that? And it's something that we are reflecting on internally. I just cannot answer your question today because it seems that for now we do not have the right type of network to coordinate these types of issues, but we are taking it into account. I think also the public procurement, there are member states who indeed are looking at their public procurement systems. Germany is being one of them. There are a few that are revising now their standards, and I think that's great. The ideal would be to coordinate it in a European way, because then you have the most impact, of course. It matters if one country does it, of course, but it matters more if 27 countries do it, or at least 10. It's just that it's not that clear how we do it in a European way. But yeah, the reflection is ongoing.
Philippe, what do you think? What are some short-term measures that could address these economic root causes of supply bottlenecks?
Yes, I think one of the topic here is definitely on the pricing. I would like to come back on what Gloria just said on the pricing. We see good examples. I mean, Theodoris mentioned Greece. We see a few other good examples, but things are moving very slowly. Yeah, on the pricing, we still see a lot of obviously pressure on healthcare systems, and this is, you know, unjustifiable somehow from our perspective. It's hitting generics, which are contributing to savings. So I think this is certainly something that we need to look into. The system is not working. Can we coordinate European-wise? Maybe yes. That would be, you know, welcome. But at least every single member state should be aware of the consequences those things can really have when we talk about the pricing. So this is one element, and I think it's one of the short-term implications that can really help. But I think we have to be very realistic as well. On the short term, the fundamental problems we might have are not going to be solved. So if we do have shortages today, the solution from my perspective on a short term is probably more on the coordinated approach, because as you said, Gloria, you have products available in some member states, but they are maybe just in the wrong place. So if there are issues on supply on a short term, this is where we can actually lever and make sure that patients are getting their treatments. And we've seen during COVID that it's actually working when there is a wish behind it. But other than that, you know, I think on a short term, there is no magic bullet. I would say, let's make sure we are defending what we have in Europe in terms of manufacturing footprint. Let's strengthen it. Let's make sure that we have an ecosystem that is really, you know, sustainable for all the actors. And then, you know, automatically things will improve, right? But there isn't any short-term magic bullet here. And maybe I would like to mention one of the initiatives that was taken in Germany. You know, I don't want to. It's just a case that comes onto my mind when the antibiotics shortages came for children. There was a kind of a temporary system for 3 months by which the maximum price was lifted, and it gave us, I think, as an industry, it gave us the impression that we are being perceived as sitting on stock, yeah. That we are not selling because, you know, the price is not good, and now because 3 months there is a period of a waiver, all of a sudden the products will appear on the market. Of course, that wasn't the case. The product was simply not available. So, you know, long answer, maybe short conclusion on this. No magic bullet on a short term. Let's work on the system, and where we have shortages, let's try to work in a collaborative way.
Okay, let's see if do you guys have any questions for the panelists? Okay, Peter, let's go to you first.
Hi, my name's Peter O'Donnell. I'm a journalist here in Brussels as well. I'm very interested in the idea of the concentration of manufacturing sites that's in your paper, Madame Κύρια. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about the thinking as to how you tackle this. As you say, there's a tremendous focus, 50% of APIs depending on 5 manufacturers for basic ingredients and so on. What's the answer, though? I mean, are we talking now about going back to reshoring manufacturing in Europe? Are we talking about some of the ideas that have come out of the Parliament in the last year or so of some sort of state-sponsored independent manufacturer here in Europe? What's the thinking on that, please?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the idea would be that for some medicines or for some ingredients, we do start production in Europe. And so the idea would be to really identify the products that we would need and then to find industrial partners, right? And I know this is an ambitious proposal, but we are doing it for microchips, and this is more or less the same problem that we have there. We are doing it for critical raw materials. I think that the key would be to start with something, because we do have a lot of medicines, and there we differ from chip. So the idea would be to start small, start with some products, and then see as we go. But we do need to adapt our financial instruments. We do need to adapt probably manufacturing processes. We need to adapt the way we procure and the way how we value the different aspects of procurement, right? Do we only value the price, or do we also value the security of supply, knowing that sometimes it's even only a few cents of difference indeed for a product that is made in Europe. So it can seem very big, but also sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very small. Sometimes it's really about paying a few cents more to have the European product here and to support that base.
Okay, next question was right here.
Thank you. I'm David Yoff from Fresenius Kabi, a Medicines for Europe company. I felt this proposal is very, very good and very timely, especially as now during the pharma legislation there was mention about strengthening the autonomy. However, there's no concrete proposal for that. So I think it's very important to focus on that right now. And then I wanted to point out, you mentioned the critical medicines list or critical molecules that would be sourced, and I think it's a good approach to only look at very few molecules, because we have around 20 critical medicines lists, so this may not be the ideal way to look at things, right? It would be great if within the European Commission there could be one list and not 3 or 4. I understand the differences between crisis and non-crisis. However, I think it's also important that the Commission leads there by example to show that they are able to harmonize the list to one list that only has very few products that are extremely critical. And this may also help in this initiative.
Well, thank you. So the list of critical medicines is really it's a super difficult discussion. It's not new, this idea of a list, and there seem to be quite some divergences between member states. That's why we would propose the approach of starting very pragmatic with the medicines for which we have had repeated shortages, and we know that there are problems, right? And if there had been problems in the past, probably there will be problems in the future. And then we can, and there are a few member states that are, for instance, insisting then that we then should integrate the HERA list of critical medicine, of crisis medicines, that we should integrate the WHO list of crisis medicines. I don't want to define that, but I do want to start with something and then expand as we go. And this would also obviously influence the decision on which products to relocate or which capacity that we want to have in Europe. The sweet spot would be probably between types of production where we have too little of, for instance, for antibiotics or biological manufacturing, and the medicines for which we have had repeated shortages.
We have a question over here. If you just want to come up and use the mic here at the table.
Okay, I'm Maggie Saikali. I represent the European producers of active pharmaceutical ingredients, so the APIs. And first of all, Madame Gecker, you are absolutely, first of all, thank you for the Critical Medicines Act. That is a great step forward. Second of all, you mentioned that 40 or 50% of APIs come from China. The situation is even more dire than that, because what doesn't come from China comes from India, and India is dependent on China for 80% of its raw materials. So the state of dependence is greater than that. But I want to give a positive input, which is on the list of critical medicines. Your colleagues from the DGS in France have started with us a work on that. They've started on 30 critical molecules, but mapping exactly what you said, which is who are the producers, what are the ingredients, where are the vulnerabilities in the supply chain, and all of that. This report has been submitted to DG HERA and DG GROW, so they have that report, and we're working on a second list. So I think that the cooperation should come from your efforts to federate all these lists, because you said it rightly, we can't have 200, but let's start with the most criticals, the ones that are a matter of life and death in case of a problem. And if you want afterwards, I can give you a bit more details on that. But there is hope, and there is something that has already been done, but we should continue on this. And then a last word, Europe cannot afford anymore to have only affordability as a criterion. Cheap medicines have a cost, a hidden cost. That cost is social, it's environmental, it goes against all of our European values. So I think that we should really look reality in the face. If we want the European way of life, we cannot go on hiding our face and buying medicines from places where our criteria are not being followed. Thank you.
Gloria, on that French list, is there a risk that we could end up with different national lists of what's critical molecules?
This risk is very real and existing, I think. Again, that's why I would really like to start with the problems for which, the products for which we know there are problems, because the reason is not that I think one list is better than the other, or obviously I do, but it's because we are not moving forward. And that's the problem. I mean, that's the biggest problem. It's all nice that you want a perfect list, but why not start with a good one? Was there another question? No, yeah, but we are happy with the French input, of course, and it's very valuable work. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, to wrap up this panel, I just want to ask each of you, what would be your key recommendation for increasing the EU's manufacturing resilience to improve security of supply? Philippe, what would you say?
Thanks, Dave. So maybe I'll try to summarize it, 3 elements in one sentence. But I think, first of all, really creating an environment which is not only solely driven by price. I think we heard it now several times, that's really key. Creating more regulatory flexibility and dialogue is also very key. And supporting and funding green and digital manufacturing is the other element. So those 3 elements I would take as a takeaway message.
And Gloria?
Yeah, I think really we've laid out our proposal, a Critical Medicines Act and transparency on the supply chain. That would be my 2 cents. And of course, we continue as we go. Just start to work. That's a really nice message.
Great, thanks. Well, that's all the time we have for this first panel. How about a round of applause for Philippe and Gloria? So we're now going to move on to panel 2 on ensuring equitable and timely access to medicines. This is where we're really going to dive into the proposal from last week. Now, as we heard from the Commission last week, equitable and timely access to medicines remains a challenge for many European governments, and citizens from small member states are put at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts from big member states who have more negotiating power. Better access to off-patent medicines could make a significant difference here, and the pharmaceutical legislation revision is an opportunity to solve this situation. So in this panel, we're going to talk about the main challenges patients are facing to obtain access to healthcare and medicines in Europe, the barriers that need to be overcome to reach the full potential of off-patent medicines, and whether the revision can accomplish this. So let me introduce you to our panelists for this question. So we have Olga Solomon from the European Commission. She's head of unit for medicines policy, authorization, and monitoring at the Commission's Health Department. We have Anka Thoma, the Executive Director of the European Patients Forum. And we have Adrian Vandenhoven, Director General of Medicines for Europe, which of course represents the off-patent medicines that we've been talking about. Thank you to all 3 of you for joining us here today. Olga, let me start with you. Obviously, this proposal was long awaited. This was a big moment for European pharma industry watchers. Tell us a little bit about what the main measures are to deliver medicines to patients in a timely and fair way. What are the main elements of this proposal?
afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It is very exciting for us after, as you said, work of years to be able to present the proposal. So if you allow me, I will go a bit more into the details of the proposal, including also in the very interesting part of the availability of medicines that it was discussed before. So, this pharmaceutical package, it is two proposals. Actually, it is a key building block in the creation of the European Health Union and a major achievement, actually, for this Commission. The reform aims to strike, actually, a balance between innovation and access to affordable medicines for patients across the EU, while preserving the long sustainability of the health systems. Because as we heard, because this was actually, an important issue as well in this reform, the sustainability of the health systems. It is a very patient-centered proposal, and at the same time, it aims to create and support an innovative and globally competitive EU pharmaceutical industry, and also to build on the strengths of the off-patent industry. So the proposal addresses issues on access, solutions also to the challenges of shortages, and, as I said, sustainability of health systems. In broad terms, as also our Commissioner, said, it is the 3 A's: access, affordability, and availability, together, of course, with innovation. So if I go a bit to more details, you mentioned, Dave, that the problem that we have today, we do see innovation in Europe, but sometimes, in areas, where they're not address areas of unmet medical need, and when we have this innovation, it does not always reach patients. And this is a problem. You mentioned some of the numbers as well. So the proposal puts forward tangible measures to ensure that all Europeans can have access to medicines and to close the gap between this big difference among member states. So how we do that? You know that in the EU we have a very strong system of protection of innovation. And both with patent and SPCs, but also with what we call regulatory data protection, which is actually blocking competition from generic industry for 10 years right now. So these legal proposals will not touch, because there has been some confusion about this, will not touch into the system of patents or SPCs. We are just, dealing, with regulatory data protection. And how are we going to deal, with this? It is that we, as I mentioned before, now we have one-size-fits-all system, where all medicines, independent of the value that they add, in the system, they will get, a blanket, coverage of 8 years of data protection and 2 years of market protection, so overall 10 years protection from generic competition. Now we change that and we say to industry, innovative industry, we want to reward innovation. So you can go at least as high as the protection that it is today, but for that, companies, they have to actually go the extra mile and provide EU-wide access, also to provide unmet medical needs, and to provide for comparative trials data. And why do we do that? Because we want to actually encourage more targeted innovation, and also innovation that, as I said, reaches the patient, because this is, an important objective of this proposal, because innovation that doesn't reach the patient, it has no meaning. So in addition to that, we have a system, to be a bit more specific. So now, the starting point will be 6 years, and then, we'll build up with 2 years of additional data protection if the product is put in all EU member states, plus 6 months for unmet medical needs and 6 months for comparative trials. So this can actually bring even 1 year more than what we have today if all these conditions are fulfilled. If these conditions are not fulfilled, then, that means that generic products can go into the market earlier, and this can improve, in a way, the access or affordability. So, it can, this conditionality brings wins, and especially, also for the health systems, without, as I said before, blocking innovation, because we still have a very, generous system of incentives compared to the other jurisdictions. Then, with orphan medicines, there again, these are areas of rare diseases, where we really need innovation for all areas. And, we keep, again, a very strong system of incentives. We differentiate between medicines for rare diseases and those, where we do not have any medicines, because we know that 95% of rare diseases that don't have any treatment right now. So we want to actually, with a small differentiation, still, important, with the 1 year difference between the two, to actually, give more push into areas where we don't have innovation. And in addition, for new indications of medicines for rare diseases, again, you can build up additional incentives. With regard to affordability, we have to be clear that, this is a legislation that cannot go into areas of pricing. And, we discussed before the importance of the pricing in all dimensions, for generics, etc. But what we are striving to do with this proposal, it is an environment that it can be an enabling environment for actually affordability and better availability of medicine and especially generics. So coming to generics, there are several different aspects that we improve with this legislation in order to create, better conditions for the authorization and the entry of generics. To facilitate day one entry of generics, Philippe mentioned, a few elements before: regulatory flexibilities, non-duplication of work, where we have repeated sometime assessment of generic medicines, or the repeat use, application. There are different, simplifications that we propose in the legislation, which we call actually the hidden champions of these proposals, that we think that will have a very strong red tape effect, and also, reducing cost, especially for generics industry, which has specific vulnerabilities. With regard to the availability, and the shortages, it was discussed a lot, in the previous panel. And this is one of the main objectives, actually, of this proposal as well, given the big problem that we have in Europe with, the shortages, which actually, become a global issue. So how are we going to address it? It is with stronger obligations of supply. So the revision complements the existing cooperation of the EMA with the member states authorities by proposing specific measures such as earlier notification of shortages and withdrawals. And also, very important, you mentioned before and discussed the list of critical medicines. Even we propose in the legal proposal the establishment of such list of critical medicines, so to avoid this dispersion, of course, taking into account work which is already done by member states, or, as well, internationally, you mentioned WHO, but also, with HERA. But, this becomes kind of, an element of the legal proposal, which is very strong, so that, we create such a list in order to be able to take measures both to prevent shortages, but also to monitor and act, when these appear. And this, as I said, will happen also, with a closer cooperation at EU level, with a stronger role for EMA and a steering group of medicine shortages where member states participate. Coming back to the innovative aspect of industry, I think that, we need to remain also globally competitive, and there are many ways we are doing that, One of them, it is, as I mentioned before, by, focus also, with the incentives and focusing on unmet medical needs. There is a specific element in the legal proposals about a specific area of unmet medical need, which is the antimicrobial resistance. There, the threat is, really imminent. It is, the next crisis. And, we are speaking about very telling numbers of deaths and economic impacts, in Europe that, we need to address. And we do this with different actions at EU level. But, in these specific proposals, with two different type of strands of work. One, it is by reinforcing prudent use measures. So in the proposal, we have very specific actually measures about, the adequate pack size, the appropriate information for patients and healthcare professionals, antimicrobial stewardship plans, including risk mitigation measures, which will be, part of the marketing authorization and of the product information. The second, which is, more goes into the direction of the of innovation, and it has been a lot discussed even before the proposal was there. It was the proposal about the vouchers. It is a kind of an incentive which is proposed to somehow give more support for innovation, because what it happens now, by definition, the antibiotics, they are there not to be used. And actually, there is not incentive for companies to actually to invest in research and innovation in these areas, because they know that there is no market for this product. So to overcome that, of course, there are different models, but in this proposal, we propose for companies which are typically, SMEs, to have, if they develop a specific, type of antimicrobials which are novel and specifically acting against antimicrobial resistance, so we are talking about really novel molecules, to be able to get a reward of 1 additional year of data protection. And to overcome, related, of course, economic aspects which will influence the health systems from the delay of generics, we propose a very strictly frame, actually, program, where, as I said before, the conditions for getting these incentives, they are extremely strict. And what we aim with that is to promote actually innovation for antibiotics that we critically need. And this, of course, with combination with prudent use measures. I'm sorry to take so much time, but it is really a very wide, revision. So even if I speak, I will not cover everything. One of the last, one important thing, it is, of course, the regulatory simplification, which is extremely important. I mentioned before, some specific issues, for generic companies, but the innovative, or if you would like, character of this revision, to support innovation, it goes much beyond that. We have, for example, new concepts like a sandbox, because we see that innovation is running much faster than, that legislation can cope with. So, we are looking into solutions like the sandboxes, which are very, prototype and, very advanced concepts, in the legislation, or as well, ways to keep the legislation agile with regard to, for example, with adapted regulatory frameworks, digitalization, it is an important element, both in addressing products that there will be products of digitalization, like combination of medicines with medical devices, but also digitalization of processes that, will have a lot of gains, or the electronic product information that it is a big demand from industry. And then to close this, some environmental aspects, are addressed in the legislation to actually address some long-standing issues, with the presence of pharmaceuticals in the environment. At the same time, keeping proportionality of what we propose in order to address the environmental issues, but, without putting unnecessary burdens to industry, especially, generic industry, which, for example, can rely companies to the data of the originators. So, with this, I will close. Of course, I could mention many more things, because this is a reform which goes as wide as it goes deep. But at the same time, I mean, I'm looking forward to the discussion we will have today as well.
Thanks a lot. Anka, let's go to you next. As I mentioned, people working in this sector have been closely watching this proposal. So you guys at the representing the patients, you're going to be reviewing this. What are your key priorities as you're looking at this proposal as it's going to work its way through the legislative process here in the Parliament and at the Council?
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation for this discussion. I would also add thank you for inviting patients to this discussion, the patient representatives to this discussion. It is a promising start to the debate, and I hope that we'll be able to contribute to many more. And that actually brings me to what we want from this legislation. I would say our priorities are structured around three areas. One is promoting patient access earlier and timelier and at affordable levels, ideally. For which I have to say we welcome the proposals of the Commission to incentivize earlier entry of innovative medicines and by extension also of generics, because everything gets moved to a little bit earlier for patients. This responds to one of our members' main concern, which is that it takes too long to access treatments. We are tired of waiting. The second priority that we have is about security of supply, and in particular, shortages are a massive concern of ours. I think the proposal, or we think the proposal is going in generally the right direction. We very much welcome the creation of a transparent database, and we would support the use of the European Medicines Verification System to kind of figure out where the stocks are and how to get them from where they exist to where they are needed. And I think there are some template measures that were taken earlier this year to address shortages, late last year, earlier this year, through the EMA's steering group. So that, I think, goes in the right direction. What we would also stress is the importance of strengthening patient reporting of shortages through the introduction of a mechanism that allows patients or patient groups to report repeated shortages, because shortages are not just a supply chain issue. They actually they mean people do not get the medicines they need in the pharmacy, in the hospital. So I'd like to put that human touch on the term shortage, because it's not an abstract thing. It means someone having to dose their medicine, someone having to take a medicine that was not exactly as prescribed, someone living in stress. There is a study by one of our members about the psychological stress caused by the chloroquinolone craze during the pandemic, because that medicine is in short supply. It's used to treat not a very common disease, and misinformation led to people flocking and taking those precious supplies for lupus patients, and that is, it's an issue. But there is no, I'm going to go back, there is no foreseen system for patients and patient organizations to feed into that database, and we'd like to see that as well, because that is putting the patients at the center. The third issue that we'd like to stress is the importance of reinforcing the structured involvement of patient organizations throughout the system, the regulatory system, from the very early stages of development until the pharmacovigilance and post-marketing measures. I mentioned already the shortage reporting, but we welcome, for example, the reinforced patient participation in the European Medicines Agency. We also welcome the rewards, the innovative rewards for comparative trials, because that actually is about patient needs. We'd like to see a reinforced patient involvement in the development, for example, of the patient information leaflet, of layperson summaries, of the antibiotic awareness card that is now foreseen for antibiotics, of everything that reaches patients, really. So we want to be there at the earliest stages, and to do that, we'd like to see a clear political commitment, not just from the Commission, but also from the member states, to involve patients and their representatives in the system.
Great, thanks a lot. Adrian, let's turn to you next. So you guys will be watching the development of this legislation from the perspective of generic and biosimilar medicines. So what can be the role of those medicines in increasing affordability, sustainability, and accessibility of medicines? And which specific measures in the revision proposal would support the off-patent pharmaceutical industry in achieving that objective?
Well, thanks a lot for that question. And I have to say I'm very excited right now, because we're now working on a legislation that's been proposed by Olga and her colleagues and the commissioners and all those people. And it's a very exciting time, because I think this long gestation or culmination for this legislation came about because really it's quite a radical change, or it's reflecting a radical change, which is in the past, the Commission was in charge of rules to get medicines approved. And once they were approved, there was some maintenance and pharmacovigilance kind of regulatory stuff. But now the Commission, or I would say more the European Union, it's not the Commission alone, is now responsible or working with the member states to make sure that those medicines get approved, and then patients get access to them. And I think this is the truly big revolution behind this legislation. And that's why it's so sensitive, partly why it's so sensitive. There are other issues, of course. I think which is also a big change, is that the Commission has been very committed to off-patent medicines because of the access role that they play. So generic medicines have doubled access to medicines. Biosimilar medicines, which 15 years ago a lot of people didn't believe in, they've increased access to biological therapies by 50%, and contributed massively to savings. Today, biosimilar medicines over the next 5 years are going to contribute roughly an equal amount as generic medicines over the same period. So this is a massive, massive contribution. And so the Commission has understood that and is playing this role. And certainly, I think there are some big proposals in there. One is, of course, if innovative medicines are not launched in all member states, then there will be an earlier possibility to launch generics, provided this is a very predictable system. And then, of course, the price competition will come in and the better access will come in that way. Otherwise, there'll be some arrangements, let's say pricing arrangements with the innovators. So I think that's a pretty important change. And certainly we are willing to engage there. Again, we need to have these predictable rules so that our members can actually do that, because generic medicines, biosimilar medicines, they have to be approved also by the Medicines Agency. That takes some time. Another key element I think that's there is there's been, a lot of attempts to use the patent system in some pretty funky ways to delay generic launches, sometimes fairly successfully, sometimes requiring competition law enforcement to stop some of this. And so I think here we see there's also a very clear attempt to try and solve some of these issues the way that the European Union can do so, because the European patent system is actually separate from the European Union. So it's tricky. But there's an effort there, and I think it's really, really positive. Beyond that, there are also some very significant regulatory ideas. For example, I mentioned biosimilar medicines, but also for many generics. We will be targeting in the future innovative drugs that have very small patient populations, maybe with many indications, but really tiny indications. And from a regulatory point of view and a market point of view, it's not easy actually to bring those medicines to the European market, even from a regulatory point of view. And I think there's a lot of good thinking in there about how we can do that, so that as it's working today, we can bring that competition, bring that sustainability, bring that access for the patients and the savings to the healthcare systems that are really, really needed. So I think that's all very good. I think I don't really agree with the transfer, or I don't agree at all with the transferable exclusivity voucher proposal. Not that I don't agree with supporting access to reserve antibiotics or novel reserve antibiotics as well. The main problem we have with this is that it basically is a market to buy an extra year of monopoly for blockbuster drugs that are not antibiotics or not antimicrobials. And I think this is a highly controversial move, and one which will backfire if it goes forward. On the other hand, we do note that the Commission is proposing a reserve fund to create an actual market for reserve antibiotics, which I think is necessary for innovative, but also for off-patent reserve antibiotics. Only 4 or 5 member states actually have these reserve antibiotics today. So if we would have some kind of major AMR-type outbreak, only a limited number of member states would actually have these available today. And they're off-patent, so they're not expensive. Okay, so we have really a problem there. And I think this is again showing that the Commission is working with the member states to solve these kind of problems that member states cannot solve alone, but also getting more directly involved in the markets. Another thing, probably maybe less attractive to a lot of people here, but there is an issue around, for instance, repurposing older medicines for a lot of these rare diseases. Olga mentioned there are 5,000 of them. Most of them do not have a drug in development, an innovative drug in development. But there are opportunities for repositioning or reformulating medicines for many of these diseases. But it's very, very tricky from a regulatory point of view and from a market point of view to do that. And we see that the Commission has analyzed all the regulatory barriers and is trying to solve legislation, but even looking at some of the market barriers within the limits of what the European Union can do, of course. And we think that's also very, very positive, because this is not an easy nut to crack, I have to say, because our industry is supposed to be supplying these or engaging in some of these regulatory developments and clinical developments and things. It's not straightforward, but I do appreciate really the efforts there. And I think there are other benefits of this. I think in the future, we need to unclog the hospital systems, which are overflowing and which are breaking down in Europe because they have a lack of human resources. We can do that by reformulating, adapting our medicines, or help with that process of unclogging the hospitals, so that really there can be fewer waiting times and all this kind of stuff, the problems that we see everywhere in Europe today. This proposal could also work in that space. Finally, I think it was mentioned shortages. This is really about making sure that patients get their medicines at all times. Obviously, one of the big challenges we've seen over the past few years, and COVID was maybe the biggest of these challenges, we've seen a lot of demand surge shortages. So you mentioned HCQ, but we've seen it also with certain hormones, a sudden surge in demand. We had it with antibiotics, especially for children over the winter time. These were massive surges, okay? So like the antibiotics for children this winter were between 300 and 500% increase in the demand. So that's not a small chump change of demand. And there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on. And as Gloria was pointing out, sometimes we can work together to move products from one country to the other. We need some flexibility. We need those digital leaflets for that. We need digital leaflets for other reasons also. For sometimes, a lot of people can't read the paper leaflet because it's so tiny and the wording is so terrible. It doesn't actually explain patients very much. So it'd be better if we had other alternative forms like videos or a podcast or something like that to explain to patients. But there are other reasons. But this digital leaflet could really enable us to move things. But there's another problem. As Gloria pointed out, if you want to move products, say, from Belgium to Holland to help Holland in a shortage, well, Gloria is going to say, are you not going to create a shortage in Belgium before you help Holland? Right? And that's a legitimate question from Gloria, because she wants to help Holland, but she cares a lot about Belgium too, right? Well, who has that data? Nobody does, right? Because we have systems like the EMBS, we have some data that the manufacturers have. Probably we need some way to work with wholesalers in some cases. So we need to pool this data so that I can reassure Gloria, or my companies can reassure Gloria, if we send a certain amount of stock to Holland, we're not going to cause a major shortage in Belgium. You can do that solidarity move towards your northern neighbors, or vice versa. But without having this data, it's really, really difficult. And we know this because we worked under the authority of the Commission for ICU medicines during COVID-19. And we had to construct all of this in a very, very difficult way. We had a full-time team in Medicines for Europe who's only doing this under the authority of the competition and health authorities at the Commission. It was very, very difficult. And even then, with all the data we produced, there was still hesitation of the member states saying, well, I want to help, but can I trust entirely your data? And we need to move to build that trust. Trust can be built on this data. And I think there we really need to move this forward. So I'll stop there, but I think it's very, very exciting. This legislation is not perfect, but the direction is towards the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing it happen.
Thanks, Adrian. So, Olga, let you respond to some of the points that were raised by Enka and Adrian, particularly from this perspective of the role of generics and biosimilars in the proposal.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, on Anka's points that they go actually beyond the generics, but they are extremely important issues. What it is the role of the patients and in our, pharmaceutical system. And the proposal addresses, many of the aspects that Anka mentioned, and I hope to the extent that it is expected, the promotion of the earlier access. Adrian also mentioned it is the first attempt that, actually it is done, through a legal proposal to facilitate, this patient access. And there are specific measures that they are put, responsibilities to companies, but, in reality, we want to go beyond, what it is, these responsibilities or obligation. What we want to achieve it is a change, of behaviors. Companies to be responsibilized to go to all member states to be ready, to actually, from their side, act responsibly, and all together, to promote access for the patients, because that it is, actually the common objective, or should be the common objective of everyone. On the security of supply, many of the issues are addressed, and I fully agree with Anka. When we looked in this proposal, at least from the Commission point of view, the patient was in the center. In studies that we have done, we recognize that this creates a big stress for patients and healthcare professionals as well, because, at the end of the day, it is patients we serve. With regard to the voice of patients, again, a very important point, we are doing, quite some major steps, in the already EMA, in the last years, they have made big efforts to integrate the voice of the patients in all their, actions, including the patient leaflet, the understanding, etc. We are going, now even in the legal proposal to reinforce for the first time the voice of patients in the main committees, the main committee of, with a big number of patients there, and bringing expertise, into the main committee and other measures. I think that, I will take, Adrian's, introduction, and pleases me to actually hear, good, words, and that we address many of the issues. On the issues of vouchers, we recognize the issues that, Adrian mentions, and you will find them even in an analysis in our impact assessment. So we are not blind to this, but it is a proposal to the member states that includes some costs, but, costs that they have been weighted, against a huge cost that the AMR brings to health systems. So we are running out of solution, basically, and I will recognize as well that there are other actually initiatives, from colleagues at HERA that they are promoted in that, and they are equally important. Adrian mentioned, the importance of this measure, especially for all antibiotics. and extremely important. We are talking here about more novel and very special innovation. So there is kind of a complementarity, and there is a cost, nobody denies that, but as I said before, it is the proportionality of this. I think that I would say that I don't have much to add to the point from Adrian. I agree with him that, and I liked his expression, it is a radical change. It is, a big change, and actually in that sense, we are, quite proud because, we did it, many people say it took very long time. It took 2 years from evaluation and impact assessment to legal drafting, and actually, I am also very proud because we can support it, with data. So in that sense, it is kind of a holistic proposal that we give now to the Council and the Parliament, with the member states to measure all this. And in that respect, I think that it also is very kind of, balanced, especially from the generic industry point of view, so that, we create kind of a dynamic for this sector to actually provide these very important products, for patients and the health systems.
Okay, let's see if there are any questions from the audience for the panelists. Yes, right over here.
Yeah, Spiros Papas. I'm speaking in a capacity of possibly a future patient, hopefully not, but you never know. I understand that the proposal of the Commission is indeed comprehensive and balanced. It reminds me the old good times of a creative commission, forward-looking. Very glad. From this point of view, I wonder, what is the added value of the Belgian proposal? What does it bring in addition to what the Commission is proposing? Because I understand early warning systems, etc. Or I wonder whether the Belgian proposal could be integrated in the proposal of the Commission. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have to say we are also quite happy with the proposal of the Commission. They worked quite hard, and I can't say too much because we have the presidency soon, so we will have to do these negotiations. But really, I admire what the Commission did. The difference is that it does not work on the level of production. It's completely different in a way. And there's some overlap, of course, because of course it also deals with permitting procedures, and there's also the list of critical medicines that is also integrated in this proposal. So there is some overlap, but really I think that these two proposals could perfectly work together, and preferably we launch the Critical Medicines Act before the pharma legislation is closed, so that if we need to change something in the pharma legislation in order to achieve the goals that we want to set out in the Critical Medicines Act, then we can still do it, but it's not the same.
Olga, could the Critical Medicines Act be integrated into the proposal?
Yeah, I think that, I would agree actually with Gloria that, first of all, to say that in the Commission we are very happy with the Belgian paper because some of the proposals that they are in the paper support very much the direction of the legal proposal. So in that sense, there is a lot of complementarity. We are, I cannot take immediately position about the act, because we have to think, actually, about the vulnerabilities, we have to analyze probably, about the timing of the list. We have to think, from the experience of establishing a list of critical medicines, where are the exact vulnerabilities? Can we use this instrument, for medicinal products? So, I would not say, yes or no, but, where we again agree, with the initiative, it is that we need a toolbox, for addressing shortages, that it is a very important point that Gloria mentioned. And in that respect, we have to think about everything, although I cannot at this point, say And I don't think that, as Gloria said, this is industrial policy. I don't think it is something that it can be integrated in the legal proposal. Now the way it is, how do we see the complementarity of the different actions?
Do we have another question for the panelists? Yep, you got a second shot.
I was first checking if somebody else wants to ask. I very much welcome the proposal, as Adrian said. Of course, there's some shortcomings which hopefully member states, the Commission, and the Parliament can overcome, especially around the transferable exclusivity voucher, which I think is also, if you add up, it would end to 2 more years of data exclusivity instead of 1 more, as you mentioned earlier, which I think is a problem and which creates some insecurity. But on a positive side, I think it's very, very good that there's a proposal for electronic patient information leaflet, which can help patients in Europe, of course, to read in their language, also when they go on holiday. When I'm in Greece, I cannot read the patient information leaflet. So I will be happy to use the e-pill if that then is provided. I want to maybe draw also the attention on maybe some products that could already implement that earlier as in the proposal foreseen, because we have a lot of hospital products, and I have been visiting some customers in the hospital segment, and if you go to a hospital pharmacy, you will see they open the pack, throw away the patient information leaflet, and then bring it to the ward, to the right department within the hospital. And this is an extreme waste, and I just made a calculation for our company, Fresenius Kabi. We cut down, so to say, 20,000 trees every year just to provide the patient information leaflets. And I think this cost, and we are primarily a hospital product company, and no HCP, no nurse, no person working in the hospital is going to read that patient information leaflet, nor the patient that is laying in the bed receiving an infusion. So just as maybe a hint that this could be considered with the member states and so on.
Yeah, just to check, Olga, is there something that the legislation could do to address that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yes, and it is designed into the legislation, this, how can you say, with smooth transition into the electronic product information. I mean, we have started already a pilot project, with the member states and the medicines agency, into testing what would be the requirements for the electronic product information. But also there are some pilots, at member states level. There are some member states that, in actually agreement with the Commission, they have started very targeted pilot projects at national level, especially with hospital medicines, to see how this would work. And all this, knowledge comes into our proposal, but also into the implementation. And as you will see in the proposal, this implementation of the electronic product information, it is coming, kind of a transition, and it depends on the member states. Because, we need to be aware that electronic literacy, and digital, competencies at different member states, or how to say, uptake is different than member states. So while we want to promote the idea of the electronic product information for many reasons, updated information for patients at the moment it happens, the company-related perspectives, shortages-related perspectives. At the same time, we have to be very respectful about patients, because, we have to cater for all patients, for those that they can have electronic access, but for those also that they need the paper leaflet. So the design of these provisions in the legislation, they allow for member states to, if they wish and if they are ready, to take up the electronic product information, where others, may actually, take it later on. And we have some revision, in the, we have some, the possibility to review, this knowledge, in the legislation and see where we go with electronic product information in a more general way. And just, into parentheses, if it happens you are on holidays and you don't have the language in the packet, just to tell you that even now, you can find, especially for centrally authorized products, the product information in all languages, not, for nationally authorized products, but if it is, at EU level, you can have it already now. Then, on the vouchers, I wanted to add, because there's a lot of discussion about the vouchers, just to put a bit of context with the measures that, we put in place, we do not expect more than 10, vouchers in 15 years. And actually, for those that, you come a bit with more scientific background and what it is happening in this field, you will know that the pipelines are so dry that if, we see 10 products in 50 years, I think we should be, quite happy, about this. That means that it is extremely restrictive. It's not like, we are going to see, a flooding of vouchers on the market, and transactions between companies.
We've received some questions online. I think the one that we haven't addressed so far is on the definition of shortages. Olga, this might be for you, but if Adrian or Anke, if you want to answer this as well. The question is, are all EU member states using the same definition of shortage? There's been this discussion that some shortages could be caused by parallel exports. Are all member states on the same page about what a shortage is?
No, they're not right now. And I think this is, actually one of the reasons, why we're going a bit more deep into the legislation and addressing the issue of shortages, because, we will define, what a shortage is, what it is a critical shortage, what it is a shortage of a critical medicines. And, this aims to actually create this more kind of common understanding. So because when you have a common understanding about where the problem is, then you can better coordinate, the problem at European level. So there will be this in the legislation.
Adrian?
Yeah, I think in this respect, there are some improvements in the legislation proposed. I do think, however, that this is an area where the Commission will need to impose some common standards at some point, because the reality is the way shortage reporting is done is
It's working again.
For the patients, doesn't work for the industry.
Very good. We have a louder voice. Wonderful. And because there is no common definition of shortages, you need to integrate the patient reporting aspect of it, because you need to be able to know a patient will only be able to go to 3 pharmacies, 5 pharmacies, whatever, but a patient experiences a shortage in a different way than the healthcare system at the national level does, okay? For me, a shortage is when I can't find my kid's antibiotic in 3 pharmacies because my kid is sick and I don't have the time to go to 10 of them, or to look online, or to ask, or to call, or whatever. And that's important. And consolidating this information on where the stocks are can also help at the local level, at the regional level, not just in solidarity between the member states. That's the one thing. The other thing that I wanted to say is there's got to be an equity aspect, and I'm sorry I'm commenting on stuff that's been said and commented already, but I think it's quite important. When it comes to the electronic patient information, we need to think about who this is for and why this is. Now, we are in principle in favor of developing electronic patient leaflets because from a patient perspective, they allow to update with safe information a lot faster than paper does. And it, of course, from an environmental perspective, it's the responsible thing to do. But not all the patients are able and ready to adopt that. And it's an equity thing. Not everyone has access to the same digital tools, like it or not. So I'd like to see some matching investment in the development of the digital infrastructure, of the digital health literacy, and of how to structure this information with patients better. Because the reality is most chronic patients that have the same treatment over years and years and years, they don't need a patient leaflet. As long as their treatment remains the same, they don't need it. But unfortunately, there's a new entry into the patient population, and they require assistance and information, and they don't have it. And I don't think Europe is ready yet. So I would also advise or promote something more of a European roadmap rather than letting member states do their thing. With all due respect, of course, because we need to move everyone forward together at a similar pace rather than creating multiple speeds. I'll stop here.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, we're just about out of time, but I was going to have each of you give kind of a key recommendation so you can make that part of your
I just want to react very quickly to this one. Oh, I get to use the patient voice now. So I think one thing we need to be clear as we are advocates of electronic product information, I think what we want to agree on with the patients, with the healthcare practitioners, is that the patient needs the information. So if a patient is unable to have a smartphone or to be able to use digital tools, then there must be a solution. And this we agree. So the starting point is the patient must have access to the information. And I think what we want to do is find solutions for those situations where, for whatever reason, this is not there. I think in the hospital, as was said, this is almost never going to happen. In a community setting, it's a bit more challenging. But there are technical solutions to this as well. And this is where we would like, from our side, to focus on. So I want to reassure that we want to ensure, and I believe the Commission is on the same lines, that everyone gets the access to the information, preferably in a form that is a little bit better than the micro, like if you live in Belgium, you get this triple language version, which is good if you have different languages, but it's very, very difficult to read for those who are not in the EU40 club. I'll just stop there.
Okay, so just real quick before we wrap up, I just want to get from both Adrian and Enka, what is the main thing you would like to see improved in the legislative process on this proposal in 30 seconds? Adrian, you can go first.
So for us, I think the key thing is the predictability of the measures related to incentives, to enabling immediate launch of competition when patents and other things expire. For us, it's the predictability.
And Enka?
Improved patient involvement in all the regulatory steps, the shortage reporting, the definition of unmet needs, which I chose not to talk about today, the AMR awareness cards, and anywhere else with a direct impact, but these are just the 4 initial points.
Great. Well, we have a long legislative road ahead of us for MEPs and ministers to chew over all of those recommendations. How about a round of applause for our panelists on the second panel? And now for our final concluding remarks, I'd like to turn the floor back over to MEP Kympouropoulos for some concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Dave, and dear panelists and dear guests. I think that We had a very fruitful discussion. We heard opinions and practices from abroad with different aspects. We had an analytical opinion from the industry perspective and how important it is to simplify procedures and give incentives in order to strengthen the APIs manufacturing across Europe. We should also create a tracking system for all drugs with the help of European health data space and pharma package legislation. We had the chance to get informed for the initiative Critical Medicines Act that is happening now in the European Council with the cooperation of 19 member states about the support of European manufacturers. Raw materials independence could not be just a code. As European Union, we saw that future challenges in health sector could come up and destabilize the member health systems. I'm proud that I see big companies investing in new factories which will support the future demand of raw materials. Of course, we cannot ignore the importance of patients' perspective. The need to have equal access to innovative drugs, it is something that was raised a lot. We should have innovative drugs, especially for rare diseases patients, which are facing a huge challenge having the appropriate drug. European patients are not on the bottom of the barrel, but on the top. All stakeholders, we should bear in mind that our purpose is to create a sustainable healthcare environment for all European patients. This was my intention, to bring all the actors together to have this first discussion, and I think that it will be the first of many that will follow. I would like to thank you all for your presence once again. Sorry not for being with you because of my health issue, but also I would like to thank especially Medicines for Europe and EU40 for the collaboration. Also, a sincere thanks to Ms. Solomon for your presence on behalf of European Commission, DG Sante. And last but not least, I would like to thank you, Dave, for your great moderation. Once again, thank you all for your kind attention.
Thanks very much. And indeed, as you note, this is a first discussion of many discussions to come on this legislative file in the coming weeks and months. So we're all looking forward to that. I wish you all an excellent evening, and thanks for spending your time with us.